The square was full. It was market day, and almost the whole of Villa das Acacias had stopped what they were doing to watch that. In the center of the circle of people, Fermina held a folded paper in her hands, and her hands trembled. Bellarmino Prado laughed loudly, a laugh that was not of amusement, it was of contempt. "Look carefully, my people," he said, raising his voice so that no one would miss a single word. "This woman you chose to take care of the association's papers cannot even write her own name properly. You entrusted your land to an illiterate." A heavy silence fell over the market. Some women lowered their eyes, as if the shame were theirs as well. Suana Clito, leaning on his cane, took a step forward, but Fermina gently held his arm, asking him to wait. She opened the folded paper, and she began to read, in a loud, clear voice, without stumbling over a single word, every hidden clause that Bellarmino had tried to slip into the association's contract. The clause that handed over the river lands to Coronel Prado for a fraction of their value. The clause that no one but her had noticed. Bellarmino's laugh died in his throat, and it was there, under the sun of that market afternoon, that Villa das Acacias discovered who had truly been signing, for years, the contracts that saved the lives of them all. But to understand how Fermina arrived at that square, with that paper in her hands, it is necessary to go back much earlier, to the times when she was only a girl who learned to read in secret, by the light of an oil lamp, afraid that someone might find out. Fermina was born in Villa das Acacias in a small house of mud walls and clay tiles, at the end of the street that led to the river. When she was 5 years old, a severe drought struck the sugarcane fields where her father worked, and the family was left without means. With no other choice, her parents decided to go to a distant farm in a neighboring state where there was guaranteed work in the harvest, leaving the girl in the care of her grandmother until they could settle and send for her. Letters arrived from time to time, always full of longing and promises to return as soon as they saved some money. But the distance and the cost of the journey stretched the years, and Fermina grew up having her parents more in the paper of the letters than in the memory of their faces. The one who stayed with the girl was her grandmother, Alzira, a woman of thick hands and clear eyes, who washed clothes for the wealthier families of the village to support the two of them. Alzira had a secret that almost no one knew. She could read. She had learned as a young woman from a priest who spent a few years in the village and taught, in secret, some poor children before being transferred to another parish. After he left, Alzira kept that knowledge as one keeps a jewel, never telling anyone, because she saw how the masters treated maids who got ideas about being educated. A maid who could read was a maid who asked questions, and a maid who asked questions lost her job. But when Fermina turned 7, Alzira decided that that secret could not die with her. "Come here, girl," she called one night. After the master's clothes were all ironed and folded, she pulled from under the mattress an old notebook with a worn cover and a piece of candle. "I'm going to teach you something that no one can know you know. Do you understand well? No one." And so, night after night, by candlelight, with the curtains tightly closed, Fermina learned the letters. She learned to join the syllables, then the words, then whole sentences. She learned, with scraps of old newspaper that her grandmother brought, hidden from the master's house, with the only Bible in the neighborhood, with notes that Alzira wrote just so her granddaughter could practice reading. "Why do I have to hide it, Grandma?" Fermina asked once, already about 10 years old. Alzira stopped sewing and looked at her granddaughter with a mixture of tenderness and weariness, because the world treats differently those who know and those who do not. "My daughter, and it treats even worse. Those who are poor and know, they prefer people like us, quiet, obedient, without understanding the papers they sign. As long as you keep that writing hidden in your chest, you will have a strength that no one can take from you. But if they find out too early, they will be afraid of you before the time is right, and fear too early only gets in the way." The girl did not understand everything that night, but she kept the lesson. The years passed, and Alzira grew older, her body slower, her hands more wrinkled from so much washing other people's clothes. On a calm night, when Fermina was already 18, the grandmother called her granddaughter to sit near her on the veranda. You know more than any educated young man in this village, and no one knows it except me and God, she said, her voice gentle, looking at the starry sky. One day the world will need what you know. Do not be in a hurry to show it. Wait for the right moment. And when it comes, you will recognize it. Because the heart tells you. Fermina held her grandmother's wrinkled hand and promised she would never forget those words, needing to help with the household support. Since the money from her parents' letters was becoming scarcer, Fermina went to work as a seamstress and later as a domestic servant in the big house of the Prado family, the owners of almost all the good land around the village. There she learned early the rule her grandmother had taught. She did the work well, answered politely, and never, ever let it show that she could read a note, a bill, a contract. It was not easy to keep this secret. There was a day, still in the first months of work at the big house, when the mistress left on the living room table a note addressed to herself, asking Fermina to arrange the furniture according to the attached instructions. Fermina, without realizing it, began to organize everything exactly as the note described. Piece by piece. Even before anyone explained what to do, the mistress, intrigued, asked how she had guessed the correct order. Fermina felt her blood run cold. God gave me a good instinct for these things, ma'am, she answered, lowering her eyes, her heart beating hard. The mistress accepted the explanation without suspecting anything more. But Fermina spent the following night without sleeping, remembering her grandmother's voice. If they find out too early, they will be afraid of you before the time is right. From then on, she learned to pretend more slowly, to make small deliberate mistakes, never again to let instinct betray the secret. There were also the Sundays, the only days off, when Fermina walked to the little house where her grandmother still lived, by the river, to have lunch with her and spend the afternoon at her side. The two of them sat on the veranda, and Fermina read in a low voice, almost a whisper, passages from the only book they owned, a worn Bible, frayed at the edges. She did not do it only out of devotion, but because, in that quiet corner, far from the eyes of the big house, it was one of the few places in the world where she could read aloud without fear of being seen. You will see, Grandma, she would say, closing the book and resting her head on her grandmother's shoulder. One day I will use what you gave me for something great, and it will be you who will be there, watching closely. It was at the Prado's house that she met Teodoro, grandson of Su Anacleto, one of the founders of the small association of farmers of the village. Teodoro studied agronomy in the big city and returned during vacation periods to help his grandfather. He was a young man of gentle speech and attentive gaze who treated the servants of the big house with the same courtesy with which he treated the masters. A rare thing in that time and place. Fermina and Teodoro crossed paths in the corridors in the backyard on the afternoons when he went to visit his grandfather, who lived in a simple house nearby. There was between them a silent affinity, of the kind that does not need many words to exist. Fermina never imagined that discreet friendship, and the secret she had carried since she was 7, would one day cross in a way that would change the entire village. The Association of Small Farmers of Villa das Ocasias had been founded by Su Anacleto and a few other simple men, almost 20 years earlier, with a clear purpose: to protect the small producers from unequal negotiations with the large landowners of the region, especially with Coronel Prado, owner of lands that surrounded the village on 3 sides. The problem was old and well known. Most of the association's farmers could not read. They signed contracts of sale, of lease, of loan, with a thumbprint or a crooked X, trusting the word of whoever read the document for them. And that word was not always honest. For years, the one who read the papers for the association was the village clerk, an elderly and tired man who did the work out of kindness, charging almost nothing. But his eyesight weakened with time, until one day he could no longer distinguish the tiny letters of the contracts and had to retire for good, moving to a daughter's house in another region to rest. The association suddenly found itself without anyone trustworthy to review the contracts. It was in that gap that Bellarmino Prado, nephew and right-hand man of the Coronel, offered himself with a broad smile To help the association as a gesture of good neighborliness, he began to draft and review the contracts himself, always in the name of the Prado family. So Anacleto did not trust him one bit, but without anyone to check the papers, the association was tied hand and foot. It was then that the episode that changed everything happened. One afternoon, Fermina was at Su Anacleto's house, helping to tidy the vegetable garden, as she always did whenever she had free time. When the old man, distracted, dropped a bundle of papers on the ground, she bent down to gather them and, without realizing it, her eyes ran over the lines of one of the contracts, and her face changed. "Su Anacleto," she said softly, still crouched. "Do you know what is written here?" The old man frowned. "I know what the young man Bellarmino explained to me, my daughter." "Why?" Fermina hesitated. 18 years of secrecy weighed on her tongue, but she remembered her grandmother's words. "One day the world will need what you know. Do you have a minute?" she asked. And right there, sitting on a wooden bench in the middle of the garden, Fermina read the entire contract aloud to Su Anacleto, word by word, and showed him the hidden clause in the middle of a long paragraph full of difficult terms, which gave Coronel Prado the right to administer the association's lands for 10 years, in exchange for a loan that, read carefully, was a trap. Su Anacleto turned pale. "How do you know how to read like that, girl?" "Like a doctor," Fermina then told, for the first time aloud to someone other than her grandmother, the whole story. The priest who taught Alzira, the nights with the oil lamp, the fear of losing her job, the secret kept for almost 20 years. Su Anacleto listened to everything in silence, and when she finished, he held her hands tightly. "Fermina, I need you. The whole association needs you. But if this becomes known before the right time, that Bellarmino will find a way to get you out of the way before we can protect ourselves. Do you accept doing this in secret, reviewing the contracts behind the scenes, without anyone knowing, until we have enough strength not to depend on him anymore?" She thought of her grandmother, of the silent promise of so many years, and said yes. From that day on, a secret routine began. Every contract that Bellarmino brought to the association, Su Anacleto asked for time to think, and, at night, took it hidden to Fermina's house. Or she went to his always, with simple excuses. Delivery of sewing, a neighborly visit, so that no one would suspect. She read every clause, explained what was truly written, and helped draft the replies, the revised contracts, the polite refusals that protected the farmers, without revealing who was behind them. Little by little, the association began to negotiate better. It refused it asked for changes that, mysteriously, always came with arguments, far too precise for men who could not read. Bellarmino grew more and more irritated, without understanding where that new resistance came from. It was during this period that Teodoro, returning from another period of studies, noticed that his grandfather and Fermina spent more time together, always with that air of secrecy. One night, arriving unannounced, he found the two of them bent over a contract, by the light of an oil lamp, exactly as Alzira and her granddaughter had done years before. Fermina was startled, tried to hide the paper, but it was too late. Teodora did not laugh, did not mock, did not ask indiscreet questions at the moment. He only looked at her with a new, different respect, and said softly, "I always knew you were the most intelligent person I had ever met. I just didn't know the size of it." He asked his grandfather to let him share in the secret to help protect Fermina and the association. So Anacleto accepted, and the three of them began to work together. Each contract reviewed with more care, more strategy, more courage. Between Fermina and Teodoro, what was already a silent affinity became something else, deeper. He saw her not as the discreet servant of the big house, but as the woman who, in secret, had been protecting the entire village for months. And she saw in him the only man who, knowing her secret, felt neither fear nor contempt, only admiration. On one of the nights when the three met to review a difficult contract, Teodoro brought with him, without her knowing, some books he had bought in the big city, about land laws and the rights of small producers. "I don't know if you like them," he said, a little awkwardly, placing the books on the table. But I thought that if you wanted to understand even more deeply than any of us, maybe these books would help. Fermina looked at the books as one looks at a treasure, and for the first time in a long while she felt her eyes burn with emotion in front of another person. "No one has ever given me a present like this," she said. Her voice choked. "I always had to steal knowledge in pieces, hidden. You are the first to offer it to me with an open hand." Teodoro shook his head, serious. "You weren't stealing anything. Fermina, you were only surviving in a world that gave you no other choice. That is going to change now." From that night on, besides reviewing contracts, Fermina began to study for real, with method, with Teodoro's books, deepening what her grandmother had started with scraps of old newspaper. And the more she learned, the more certain she became that Su Anacleto was right. The right moment was approaching, but not everything was only study and silent complicity. There were nights when fear tightened Fermina's chest, the fear that Bellarmino would find out before the time, the fear of losing the job that still supported her, the old fear inherited from her grandmother, that the world would treat badly those who were poor and knew too much. "And if he finds out before we are ready?" she asked Teodoro on one of those nights of distress. "And if I lose everything I still have, because of something that should have stayed hidden?" Teodoro held her hands firmly. "Then we will be by your side, my grandfather and I, whatever the cost. You are no longer alone in this, Fermina, never again." But the time of secrecy was coming to an end. Bellarmino, increasingly suspicious of the association's resistance, began to investigate who was behind the precise refusals, and he devised a final plan. An enormous, complicated contract full of hidden clauses that would hand over once and for all. Along the river, the association's best lands, to his uncle the Coronel, for a miserable price. A contract designed to be signed in haste, on a market day, in front of the entire village, as a public proof that the association trusted the Prado family. If anyone tried to delay the signing again, Bellarmino had already decided he would expose, in front of everyone, that the association was being manipulated by people too ignorant to understand what they signed, in an attempt to humiliate Su Anacleto and force the signature through shame. He still did not know how much that strategy would turn against him. On the day set for the signing, the market square was full, as always on Saturday mornings. Bellarmino arrived early, with the contract under his arm, a table set up in the center of the square, and a confident smile on his face. He had deliberately invited as many residents as possible to witness the signing, a public display of power. Su Anacleto tried once more to ask for time for the farmers to talk among themselves, but Bellarmino gave no opening. "Enough of stalling, Su Anacleto," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Either the association signs today, in front of everyone, or I will explain very clearly to this village why you keep refusing such a generous agreement. I will explain that all this resistance does not come from you, honest, hard-working people, but from someone who has got ideas about knowing more than they should, and it was 10. That he pointed with his finger at Fermina, who was standing nearby, as always discreetly accompanying the old man. "This woman here," he said with disdain, "has been meddling in the association's affairs, as if she understood papers. Look carefully, my people. This woman you trusted to take care of the association's papers cannot even write her own name properly. You entrusted your land to an illiterate." Silence fell heavy over the square, as in the scene that opened this story. Fermina felt her heart race. She could step back, stay quiet. Let Su Anacleto try to argue alone, as they had always agreed to do in secret. But she looked at the contract in Bellarmino's hands. Thought of the families who would lose the riverlands. Thought of grandmother Alzira and the lit candle hidden behind the curtain. Thought of Teodoro, who was standing beside her, ready to intervene if needed. And she remembered her grandmother's words. "When the right moment comes, you will recognize it, because the heart tells you." The heart told her. Fermina stepped forward, took the contract from Bellarmino's hands before he could react, and opened the paper. "Since you made such a point of talking about me in front of the whole village," she said, her voice firm, trembling only a little at the beginning, "then I will make a point that the whole village hears what is written here." And she began to read. She read every clause, slowly, clearly, explaining in simple words what each complicated paragraph really meant. She reached the 10th clause, the one that gave Corono Preto the right to take definitive possession of the lands along the river after only 2 years of administration, disguised among technical terms that no one without education could decipher alone. "This is not a generous agreement," she said, looking straight at Bellarmino. "This is a contract to take from you, in 2 years, the best lands this association has." And he knew that no one here would notice, because he counted on the fact that you would trust blindly whoever knows how to read. The entire square murmured in indignation. Bellarmino tried to reply, stammered something about wrong interpretation, but no one was listening to him anymore. Su Anacleto then raised his voice, leaning on his cane. "This woman," he said, pointing at Fermina, "has been reading and reviewing, in secret, every contract of this association for the last months. It was she who helped us refuse the bad clauses that this young man tried to slip in before. It was she who drafted, with my help and my grandson's, the fair agreements that saved the land of more than 10 families present here. She learned to read in secret with her grandmother, because the world treats differently those who are poor and know too much. And I, as president of this association, say now in front of everyone, this village would no longer own its own lands if it were not for her." A man in the middle of the crowd, one of the farmers whose own contract had been saved months earlier without knowing the reason, approached Fermina with tear-filled eyes. "It was you," he said, almost without voice. "It was you who had been protecting me all this time, and I didn't even know." One by one, other residents came forward, recognizing, each in their own way, how much that discreet woman had done for them in silence. Bellarmino, cornered and ashamed, still tried to argue that the contract had other advantages, but the whole village had already decided. They refused this signature, demanded that any future negotiation with the Prado family pass through public and transparent review, and asked, right there, that Fermina officially take on the role of advisor to the association, the work she had already been doing for months, but now without needing to hide any longer. Teodoro approached her amid the still celebrating crowd and did not say much, only held her hand in front of everyone, a simple gesture that, in that place and time, said everything that needed to be said. In the following months, Villa das Acacias renegotiated with Fermina's public help practically all the old contracts that had heating classes. The association grew stronger and fairer. Fermina, with the support of Su Anacleto and Teodoro, opened a small night school in the very house where she had lived with her grandmother to teach reading and writing to whoever wanted to learn, without fear and without hiding any candle behind a closed curtain. She and Teodoro married the following spring in a simple ceremony in the market square, the same place where she had been humiliated and where, later, she had been recognized. In the front row, beside Su Anacleto, already much older, was Donna Lalzira, bent by age, but with clear eyes shining with pride, holding tightly her granddaughter's hand before the ceremony began. "I said that one day you would use what I taught you for something great," the grandmother whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "And look, girl, I am here to see it with my own eyes." Fermina's parents, informed by letter of what had happened in the village, finally managed to gather enough money for the journey, and arrived days before the wedding. After so many years of distance, the reunion was full of tears and long embraces, and the family, at last reunited, watched Fermina marry, surrounded by all those she loved most. Fermina spent almost 20 years hiding that which made her strongest, because she learned early that the world often fears what it cannot control. But she kept, along with the hidden writing, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the courage to use it when that moment finally arrived. How many people around us carry, in silence, a capacity that no one sees, because life taught them to hide instead of show? How many times have we already judged someone by their simple appearance, by their mended clothes, by their soft speech, without imagining the strength that exists behind that silence. Fermina's story reminds us of a simple truth. Dignity is not measured by what others see from the outside, but by what we carry inside, even when no one is looking. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is not to shout who we are, but to choose wisely the right moment to show it. If this story touched your heart, leave here in the comments the part that moved you most. Subscribe to Canal Cree so you don't miss the next stories. And share with someone who needs to remember that a person's strength is not always in what is seen from the outside. Thank you for walking with us this far. And until the next story,